The forest was on fire behind her, and Elira's voice did not look back. Her boots tore through wet leaves and broken branches as she ran, one hand pressed hard against her side, where the skin still burned from the tattoo needle. It had taken 3 days to finish. 3 days of pain, hidden in a cellar, trusting a woman she barely knew to carve secrets into her ribs in reversed letters, so that only a mirror could reveal the truth. Now those secrets were the only reason she was still alive. Behind her, shouts rang out through the trees. Torches bounced like fireflies in the dark, closing in from every direction. She knew these woods less than the men chasing her did, but she knew something they didn't. She knew what was written on her body, and she knew that if it reached the wrong hands, thousands of people would die in a war that had not yet begun. Elira had grown up in the shadow of Blackthorn Hold, a fortress ruled by Alpha Draven's oldest rival, a man named Callum Ashgrove who spoke softly and smiled often and planned murder in the quiet hours before dawn. She had been nothing more than a scribe in his court, copying letters, filing reports, invisible to the men who made the real decisions. Invisible, until the night she stayed too late in the record hall and overheard something she was never meant to hear. Ashgrove was planning to strike 3 allied packs in a single night, using tunnels no one else knew existed, timed to hit when the mighty moon left the northern borders unguarded. If it worked, entire bloodlines would be wiped out before sunrise. Elira had frozen behind a bookshelf, heart hammering, as Ashgrove and his generals laid out troop movements on a map spread across an oak table. She had memorized every line of it before slipping away into the dark. But memory alone was not enough. She needed proof, something undeniable, something that could not be twisted into a rumor or dismissed as a lie from a runaway girl. So she had gone to old Maret, a healer who worked in secret beneath the tannery, and asked her to do something that had never been tried before. Not ink on paper, which could be stolen or burned. Ink on skin, written backward, so it could only be read using a mirror, hidden entirely from casual eyes, safe as long as she lived and breathed. Maret had warned her it would hurt. She had not warned her enough. Elira's legs burned now as she pushed uphill, weaving between trees whose branches clawed at her sleeves. She could hear the pack behind her gaining ground, their footsteps faster than hers, their senses sharper. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were shifters, and shifters did not tire the way she did. She reached a ridge and looked down into a valley she did not recognize, thick with fog, split by a narrow river that glinted under a rising moon. Somewhere beyond that valley was the territory of Alpha King Ronan Draven, the one man Ashgrove feared enough to plan a secret war instead of an open one. If she could reach Draven's lands, she might survive the night. If she couldn't, the plans on her ribs would die with her, and so would everyone Ashgrove intended to slaughter. She forced herself down the slope, sliding more than running, ignoring the way her ankle twisted painfully on loose stone. Behind her, a howl rose into the night, long and sharp, followed by a second, and a third. They were closer than she thought. She reached the river and did not hesitate. The cold hit her like a wall, stealing the breath from her lungs, but she kicked forward anyway, pulling herself across as the current dragged at her clothes. On the far bank, she collapsed for only a heartbeat before forcing herself back to her feet, dripping, shaking, but alive. The house behind her had stopped. She did not know if that meant safety, or something worse. Elira staggered through the fog, following the only rule she had left: keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Her mind kept circling back to the map on the oak table, the names of the packs Ashgrove intended to destroy, the timing that gave them only days, maybe hours, before the attack began. She had risked everything to carry that information out. She could not fail now. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. She spun, breath-catching, and found herself staring at a pair of golden eyes in the dark, low to the ground, unmoving. A wolf, larger than any natural animal had a right to be, watching her with an intelligence that made her skin prickle. She had seen enough of Ashgrove's men shift and reshape to know exactly what she was looking at. She raised both hands slowly, showing she carried no weapon. "I need to see your Alpha," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice even as her whole body trembled from cold and fear. "I have information he needs. Information that could save his people." The wolf did not move. Then, without warning, its shape began to shift, bones cracking and reforming with a sound that made her stomach turn, until a broad-shouldered man crouched where the wolf had been, dressed only in the fading light of moonrise. He studied her with an expression she could not read, somewhere between suspicion and curiosity. "You crossed the river from Ashgrove's side," he said. It was not a question. "Do you know what happens to spies who cross into King Draven's territory uninvited?" "I'm not a spy," Elira said, though she understood exactly how unconvincing that sounded, soaked, shivering, alone in the dark. "I'm trying to stop something terrible from happening. Please. Take me to your king. I'll explain everything, but only to him." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment she thought he might simply drag her back across the river and hand her over to the men hunting her. Instead, he let out a low whistle, and 2 more shapes emerged from the trees, shifting into armed warriors within seconds. "Bind her hands," he ordered. Gently. "If she is lying, the king will know soon enough. If she is telling the truth, we cannot afford to lose whatever she knows." They did not hurt her as they tied her wrists, but the rope was tight enough to remind her that she was, in every sense that mattered, a prisoner now, walking straight into the heart of enemy territory, carrying the only weapon she had left, hidden beneath her torn and dripping clothes. As they marched her through the dark forest toward whatever waited beyond it, Elira allowed herself one small, fragile hope. She had escaped Ashgrove's hunters. She had crossed into Draven's lands. Now all she had to do was convince a king who had every reason to distrust her that the marks on her ribs were not a trick, not a trap, but the only thing standing between his people and total destruction. The path narrowed as they climbed, the fog thinning to reveal the first signs of a settlement ahead, torchlight flickering between the trees, the outline of high stone walls rising against the night sky. Draven's stronghold. She had heard stories about it from traders who passed through Ashgrove's territory, stories of a fortress built into a mountainside, impossible to besiege, guarded by warriors loyal to a king who had never lost a fight he chose to enter. She wondered, walking toward those gates with her wrists bound and her heart pounding, whether tonight would be the first time that changed, or whether the secret written across her ribs would be enough to stop it before it ever began. Either way, there was no turning back now. The forest behind her was silent, the hunters lost somewhere in the dark, and ahead of her stood a king she had never met, carrying a truth that could reshape the fate of every pack in the north. She just had to make him listen before it was too late. The gates of Draven's stronghold opened without a sound, swallowing Elira into a courtyard lit by rows of iron torches. Warriors lined the walls above, watching in silence as she was led across the stone yard, wrists still bound, clothes still damp from the river. She kept her chin high, though her legs ached and her side burned where the fresh ink sat beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. The man who had found her in the woods, whose name she now knew was Garrick, walked a step behind her, close enough to stop her if she tried to run, though running was the last thing on her mind. She had come too far to turn back now. They brought her into a long hall with high wooden beams and a fire roaring at its center. At the far end, seated in a chair that was not quite a throne but commanded the room all the same, sat a man who could only be Alpha King Ronan Draven. He was younger than she expected, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair pushed back from a face that held no warmth at all as he studied her. His eyes were the pale gray of a winter sky, and when they settled on her, she felt the full weight of them, as though he were reading her without needing a single word. "Garrick tells me you crossed the river from Ashgrove's lands," Ronan said, his voice low and even. "And that you claim to carry information worth risking your life for." "I do," Elira said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the cold still clinging to her bones. "Ashgrove is planning to strike 3 allied packs in a single night, using tunnels beneath the northern ridge that your scouts don't know exist. He's timed it for when the mating moon leaves your borders unguarded. If he succeeds, entire bloodlines will be wiped out before dawn." A murmur moved through the warriors lining the hall. Ronan's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. "That is a very specific claim," he said, "from a woman who arrived soaked and bound, with no proof beyond her own word." "I have proof," Elira said. "But it isn't something I can hand you on paper." Ronan tilted his head slightly, waiting. "The information is written on my body," she said, and the words felt strange leaving her mouth, as though she were confessing something far more intimate than a battle plan. "Reversed, so it can only be read using a mirror. I had it done 3 days ago, because I couldn't risk carrying anything Ashgrove's men could find and destroy. It was the only way to make sure the truth survived, even if I didn't. The hall fell silent. Even Garrick, standing behind her, shifted uncomfortably. Ronan rose from his seat, slow and deliberate, and crossed the stone floor until he stood only a few feet away from her. Up close, he was even more imposing, and Elira had to remind herself to breathe evenly, to hold his gaze instead of looking away. "You expect me to believe," he said quietly, "that you carved military secrets into your own skin, crossed enemy territory alone, evaded Ashgrove's hunters, and swam a river in the middle of the night, also you could hand yourself over to a king who has no reason to trust you." "I expect you to believe the truth," Elira said, "because the alternative is that thousands of your people die in their sleep in a matter of days. You can lock me in your dungeon. You can question me for hours. But someone needs to read what's written on my ribs before it's too late to stop what's coming." For a long moment, Ronan said nothing. His jaw tightened, and Elira could see him weighing every possibility, the risk that she was lying, sent by Ashgrove himself to plant false information and waste his time while the real attack came from another direction entirely. She understood his hesitation. In his position, she would have hesitated too. Finally, he turned to Garrick. "Take her to the private chambers on the east wing. Not the dungeon. Post 2 guards outside, and bring Eloan to tend to her injuries." He turned back to Elira, his grey eyes unreadable. "If you're lying to me, you will regret it. If you're telling the truth, then you've just walked into the most dangerous place you could have chosen, because Ashgrove will not stop hunting you now that you've reached me." "I know," Elira said. "I made peace with that before I crossed the river." Something flickered across Ronan's face then, something that might have been respect, though it vanished before she could be certain. They led her through corridors lit by warm firelight, past tapestries depicting battles she didn't recognize, until they reached a chamber far more comfortable than she expected, a bed with heavy blankets, a basin of water, a fire already crackling in the hearth. A woman entered shortly after, introducing herself as Eloan, the pack's healer, and set to work cleaning the cuts on Elira's hands and the bruise blooming along her ankle from the fall on the ridge. "You're the one who swam the river," Eloan said, not quite a question, as she walked. "News travels fast here," Elira replied. "Everything travels fast in a stronghold this size," Eloan said, glancing up briefly. "Especially when the king himself escorts a stranger to a guest chamber instead of the cells. That hasn't happened before, not in all my years serving this pack." Elira didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, letting the healer finish her work in silence. When Eloan left, the guards remained outside the door, and Elira sat alone by the fire, hugging her knees to her chest, feeling the ache of the tattoo along her ribs with every breath. She thought about Ashgrove's hunters, somewhere out in the dark forest, furious at having lost her trail. She thought about the family sleeping peacefully in the 3 packs he intended to destroy, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. She thought about the man who had studied her so intently in that hall, who had chosen to keep her safe instead of locking her away, though every instinct in him must have screamed caution. She did not sleep that night. She sat awake, watching the fire burn low, waiting for whatever would come next. It came in the form of Ronan himself, arriving just before dawn, dressed plainly, without the formal air of the hall. He entered without knocking, though he stopped a respectful distance away, studying her with the same unreadable expression from before. "I've spent the night considering your story," he said. "And I've decided I need to see this proof myself, before I bring it to my council. If what you're saying is true, we have very little time to prepare." "Then bring a mirror," Elira said, "and I'll show you everything." Ronan's eyes lingered on her for a long moment before he turned and left the room, returning minutes later with a polished bronze mirror in hand, along with a length of soft cloth. He set both down on the small table near the fire and looked at her, waiting. Elira's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the ties of her dress, not from fear of him, but from the strange vulnerability of what she was about to reveal. This was not simply skin. This was the secret she had risked everything to protect, now laid bare before a king she had known for less than a day. "I need you to hold the mirror steady," she said, "and read it exactly as it appears. The script only makes sense in reflection." Ronan nodded once, his expression carefully neutral, though Elira noticed the way his gaze remained fixed on her face rather than her body, a small mercy she hadn't expected from a man raised in a court of warriors. She turned slightly, allowing the firelight to fall across her side, revealing the intricate lines of ink stretching along her ribs, delicate and deliberate, unlike anything Ronan had likely seen before. He lifted the mirror, angling it carefully, and Elira watched his expression shift as the reverse script resolved into readable words, revealing coordinates, troop numbers, and a timeline that confirmed everything she had told him. This is... Ronan's voice trailed off as he traced the reflected lines with his eyes, reading further, his jaw tightening with each line. This is exact. Tunnel entrances, troop divisions, the timing of the mating moon. Ashgrove has been planning this for months. I told you, Elira said quietly. I wasn't lying. Ronan lowered the mirror slowly, his grey eyes finally meeting hers again, though something in them had changed, no longer simple suspicion, but something closer to genuine consideration. You risked your life for people who aren't even your own, he said. Why? Elira pulled her dress back into place, taking a moment to steady herself before answering. Because I grew up watching Ashgrove make decisions that destroyed innocent lives without a second thought. I couldn't stay silent when I found out what he was planning. Even if it meant running. Even if it meant this. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly between them, and Elira felt something strange settle in the air of the room, a tension she couldn't quite name, something that had nothing to do with battle plans or enemy hunters. Ronan finally straightened, tucking the mirror beneath his arm. I need to gather my counsel immediately. We have less time than I thought. He paused at the door, glancing back at her. You remain here, under guard, but not as a prisoner. As my guest. Whatever happens next, you've earned that much. As the door closed behind him, Elira allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time since crossing the river, though the feeling settling in her chest was not quite relief. It was something else entirely, something that had started the moment Ronan's grey eyes met hers in that firelit hall, something she did not yet have a name for, but suspected she would soon. The council chamber was already full by the time Ronan arrived. Generals and advisors crowded around a long table carved from dark wood, maps spread across its surface. Elira stood near the door, brought in at Ronan's own insistence, though she could feel the weight of every suspicious glance thrown her way. A stranger from enemy territory, standing among the most trusted men and women in the kingdom, was not something these warriors welcomed easily. She carries the truth about Ashgrove's plan, Ronan announced, setting the bronze mirror on the table for all to see. I've confirmed it myself. Tunnels beneath the northern ridge, time to strike when the mating moon weakens our defenses. 3 packs are the target. Ours included. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair, introduced only as General Ivy, stepped forward, her eyes sharp with distrust as she studied Elira from across the room. How do we know this isn't exactly what Ashgrove wants us to believe? A woman appears from nowhere, claims to carry secrets on her own skin, and somehow you decide to trust her within a single night. I don't trust blindly, Ronan said evenly. I read the script myself. The details match patterns we've suspected for months, troop movements we couldn't explain until now, supply routes that never made sense until this moment. If she were lying, she would have invented something simpler, something easier to verify quickly. This is too specific, too detailed, to be a trick. Ivy's gaze remained fixed on Elira. And if it's a trap designed to pull our forces toward a fabricated threat where the true attack comes from elsewhere, then we prepare for both possibilities, Ronan said, but we cannot afford to ignore what she's brought us. Not when the cost of being wrong is the lives of everyone in 3 territories. The room fell into tense discussion, generals debating troop placement, scouts arguing over which routes needed immediate reinforcement, advisors questioning timelines and resources. Elira remained silent through most of it, though when a young commander named Aldrich turned to her directly, she found herself pulled into the heart of the planning. You said the tunnels connect beneath the ridge, Aldrich said. Do you know how many entry points there are, or only the number Ashgrove mentioned in his meeting? 4 entry points, Elira said. 2 on the western slope, disguised as old mining shafts, and 2 closer to the river, hidden beneath collapsed rock that his engineers cleared out months ago without anyone noticing. I saw the exact coordinates on the map before it was taken down. They are all written on my ribs, if you need me to confirm again. Aldrich exchanged a glance with Ronan, clearly surprised by the precision of her answer. That matches strange reports we received from a patrol near the western slope 3 weeks ago. They said the ground felt hollow in places, but we dismissed it as old erosion. It wasn't erosion, Elira said. It was exactly what you're worried about. Slowly, the tone in the room began to shift. Suspicion did not disappear entirely, but it softened into something closer to reluctant respect, as more of Elira's details lined up with fragments of information the pack had already gathered but never fully understood. By the time the council session ended, plans were already forming, patrols reassigned, scouts dispatched toward the western slope under cover of darkness, reinforcements quietly repositioned near the river entrances. As the room emptied, Ronan lingered near the table, watching Elira with an expression she still couldn't quite decipher. "You handled that better than most seasoned advisors would have," he said once the last of his generals had left. "I spent years watching men make decisions that destroyed lives," Elira said. "I learned to pay attention to details, because details are usually the difference between surviving and not." Ronan studied her for a long moment. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you, and it might help us understand exactly how much time we have left." He led her out of the council chamber and through a series of narrow corridors, eventually arriving at a tower room lined with shelves of old maps and scrolls, a quiet space far removed from the noise of the stronghold below. He unrolled a large map across a stone table, weighted down at each corner, showing the full stretch of territory between Ashgrove's lands and his own. "If the tunnels reach as far as you describe," Ronan said, tracing a line with his finger, "then Ashgrove's forces could move undetected almost to our inner walls before anyone realizes they're here. That gives us very little room for error. Then we need to seal the entrances before he can use them," Elira said, "or better, use his own tunnels against him. If your warriors know the layout in advance, you could ambush his forces the moment they emerge, before they even realize their plan has been discovered." Ronan looked up at her, something like surprise flickering across his face. "You think like a strategist, not a scribe." "I spent years copying strategies I disagreed with," Elira said. "Eventually you start imagining how you do it differently." A faint, unexpected smile touched the corner of Ronan's mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, though Elira found herself oddly aware of it, the way it briefly softened the sharp lines of his face. She looked away quickly, focusing back on the map instead, though the warmth lingering in her chest was harder to dismiss. They worked late into the evening, refining plans, marking positions, discussing timing until the fire in the tower room burned low and exhaustion finally caught up with both of them. When Ronan finally rolled the map closed, he studied her for a long moment in the dim light. "Ashgrove will know by now that you reached my territory," he said quietly. "He'll assume you told me everything. That means he might change his plans entirely, or accelerate them, hoping to strike before we are fully prepared." "I know," Elira said. "I thought about that the entire time I was running." "You're not safe here simply because you're within my walls," Ronan continued. "Ashgrove has allies in unexpected places. I need you to stay close, where I can protect you directly, at least until this threat is resolved." Elira met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them that had nothing to do with tunnels or troop movements. "Close to you specifically, or close to the stronghold in general?" Ronan didn't answer immediately, and the silence stretched long enough that Elira felt her pulse quicken under his steady gaze. "Close to me," he finally said, his voice lower than before. "There's something about you I don't fully understand yet, something I felt the moment Garrick brought you into that hall. I've never experienced anything like it." Elira's breath caught. She had felt it too, though she hadn't allowed herself to name it, not with everything else demanding her attention. "I felt it too," she admitted quietly. "I told myself it was exhaustion, or fear, or relief at finally being safe. But it hasn't gone away." Ronan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool evening air filling the tower room. "Among my people," he said carefully, "there's a bond some of us are fortunate enough to find, a connection that goes beyond ordinary attraction, beyond choice entirely. My wolf recognized something in you the moment I saw you, though I've spent the entire day trying to convince myself it was simply gratitude for the information you carried. And now? Elira asked softly. Now I don't think I can convince myself of that any longer, Ronan admitted. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the weight of his words settling between them alongside the quiet crackle of the dying fire. Elira felt her heart racing, caught between the exhaustion of the last 2 days and the strange, undeniable pull she felt toward this man she had known for less than a single sunrise. This complicates things, she finally said. I came here to stop a war, not to become entangled with the king fighting it. I'm aware, Ronan said, a faint trace of dry humor returning to his voice. Believe me, this wasn't part of my plans for tonight either. A quiet laugh escaped her, unexpected and genuine, breaking some of the tension gathered in the room. Then I suppose we'll have to figure it out alongside everything else. Together, Ronan said, and though the word was simple, it carried a weight that settled deep into her chest, a promise neither of them had intended to make, yet neither seemed willing to take back. Outside the tower window, the moon climbed higher into the night sky, and somewhere beyond the safety of Draven's walls, Ashgrove's hunters continued their search, unaware that the woman they sought had not only survived the night, but had begun to change the fate of the kingdom itself, one revelation at a time. Elira knew the danger was far from over. Ashgrove would not simply accept the loss of his advantage without retaliation, and the bond forming between herself and Ronan would only give him another reason to strike, another weakness to exploit if he discovered it. But for the first time since fleeing Blackthorn Hold, she allowed herself a small measure of hope, standing beside a king who looked at her not as a spy or a stranger, but as someone worth protecting, someone worth trusting completely. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. Word of the king's growing attachment to the stranger from Ashgrove's territory spread through the stronghold faster than either of them expected. By the second morning, Elira could feel the weight of curious and skeptical glances following her through the corridors, whispers falling silent whenever she passed, only to resume the moment she turned a corner. General Ivy confronted Ronan directly during the next council meeting, her voice carrying clearly enough that Elira, waiting just outside the chamber doors, heard every word. You cannot seriously be considering a bond with her, Ivy said, frustration sharpening her tone. She spent her entire life in Ashgrove's court. However convincing her information has proven, she remains an outsider, with connections we cannot fully verify. Your people need certainty right now, not a king distracted by feelings he barely understands himself. My feelings, as you call them, are not a distraction, Ronan replied evenly, though Elira could hear the tension beneath his composed tone. They don't change the fact that her intelligence has already saved us from walking blindly into an ambush. Whatever bond exists between us will be handled carefully, but I won't apologize for something neither of us chose. The council won't accept her easily, Ivy warned. Some will see her as a liability, a former enemy who may still hold loyalties we don't understand. Then they'll have the chance to see her prove herself further, Ronan said firmly, starting with the battle ahead. If she stands beside us and helps secure victory, doubts will fade. If she doesn't, we'll address that when it happens. Until then, I expect my council to focus on the threat in front of us, not rumors about my personal choices. Elira stepped away from the door before the meeting ended, her chest tight with a mixture of gratitude and unease. She understood Ivy's caution, even respected it in some ways, but she also felt the pressure building around her, the expectation that she prove her loyalty not just once, but continuously, under scrutiny from warriors who had every reason to doubt her. Later that day, Ronan found her in the tower room, studying the map they had marked together the night before, tracing possible ambush points along the tunnel entrances. You had the council meeting, he said, not quite a question. Some of it, Elira admitted. Ivy isn't wrong to be cautious. I understand why trust doesn't come easily, especially not for someone in my position. She's protective of this pack, Ronan said, moving to stand beside her at the table. As she should be. But she'll come to see what I already know, that you're not a threat to us. You're the reason we still have a chance to stop what's coming. And if the bond between us becomes a bigger problem than the war itself? Elira asked quietly. What happens then? Ronan turned to face her fully, his grey eyes steady despite the uncertainty in her question. Then we face it together, the same way we're facing everything else. I won't pretend the path ahead is simple, Elira. Claiming a fated mate from what my people consider enemy territory will create challenges beyond tonight's battle. But I've never felt anything like what I feel when I'm near you, and I refuse to let fear of complication push me away from something this significant. Before Elira could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them, and Garrick entered quickly, his expression tense. Scouts returned from the western slope, he said. They found fresh tracks near the tunnel entrances, more than we expected. Ashgrove's forces are moving faster than we anticipated. Ronan's expression hardened instantly, the warmth from a moment ago replaced by the focused intensity of a leader preparing for battle. How much time do we have? Based on the tracks, less than a day, Garrick said. Maybe less. Ronan turned back to Elira, urgency now clear in his voice. I need you to walk through everything you remember one more time, every detail about troop numbers, timing, and formation. If Ashgrove is moving early, we need to adjust our positions immediately. Elira nodded, pulling her focus away from the emotional weight of their earlier conversation and back into the sharp clarity she had relied on since the night she first overheard Ashgrove's plans. The tunnels can only fit soldiers moving in single file for most of the distance, she said, recalling every detail etched into her memory alongside the ink on her ribs. That means they'll need to spread out quickly once they reach open ground, or risk being trapped in a bottleneck. If your warriors position themselves at the exits before Ashgrove's forces emerge, you could stop them before they ever have the chance to regroup. That matches what our scouts observed, Garrick said, already moving toward the door to relay the information. I'll inform the generals immediately. As Garrick left, Ronan remained close to Elira, his hand briefly resting against her arm, a small gesture that carried more reassurance than words could have offered. Whatever happens in the next day, he said quietly, I need you to stay within the stronghold, protected. Your knowledge is invaluable, but your safety matters more. I can't simply hide while your warriors risk everything based on information I provided, Elira said, frustration creeping into her voice. If something goes wrong, if there's a detail I've forgotten or misunderstood, I need to be close enough to help correct it. I understand the impulse, Ronan said, but Ashgrove wants you specifically. If his forces reach the stronghold and find you exposed, it won't just be a battle we are fighting. It will be a rescue mission as well, one that could cost lives unnecessarily. Elira wanted to argue further, but she recognized the truth in his words, however reluctantly. Then let me help in a way that doesn't put me directly in danger. Let me stay near the command post, where I can offer guidance if anything shifts unexpectedly. Ronan considered this for a long moment before nodding. That, I can agree to. But you stay surrounded by guards at all times, no exceptions. Agreed, Elira said, relief mixing with lingering tension at the thought of the battle rapidly approaching. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation, warriors gathering weapons and supplies, scouts relaying updated positions, generals finalizing plans based on the information Elira had provided. She found herself pulled into strategy discussions more than once, her insight proving valuable enough that even Ivy's skepticism softened slightly by the time evening fell. As night approached and warriors began moving toward their designated positions near the tunnel entrances, Ronan found Elira one final time before the battle began, standing near the edge of the stronghold's outer wall, watching the dark tree line where Ashgrove's forces would soon emerge. Whatever happens tonight, he said, standing close beside her, I want you to know that discovering you, however unexpected the circumstances, has been the most significant thing to happen to me in a very long time. Born or not, war or not, I don't regret a single moment since Garrick brought you through those gates. Elira turned to face him fully, the weight of the coming battle heavy between them, alongside something softer, something that felt remarkably like hope despite the uncertainty ahead. Neither do I, she said quietly. Come back to me when this is over. Promise me that much. I promise, Ronan said, his voice steady despite the danger waiting just beyond the walls. Whatever it takes, I will come back to you. As the first distant howls echoed from the tree line, signaling the approach of Ashgrove's forces, Ronan pressed a brief, firm kiss to her forehead before turning to join his warriors at the front lines, leaving Elira standing at the wall with her heart pounding, watching the shadows shift beneath the moonlight, praying that the information she had carried across the river would be enough to bring him home safely when the fighting finally ended. The night erupted with sound the moment Ashgrove's forces emerged from the tunnel entrances, exactly where Elira had predicted, only to find Draven's warriors already waiting in the shadows. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks as they realized their carefully planned advantage had vanished, replaced by an ambush they never anticipated. From the command post near the outer wall, Elira watched the distant shapes moving through moonlit fields, unable to make out individual faces but recognizing the shifting patterns of a battle unfolding exactly as they had strategized. Ivy stood beside her, tension radiating from every line of her posture as she relayed updates from scouts positioned closer to the fighting. "They are falling back toward the western tunnel," Ivy said, studying a runner's breathless report. "Ronan's forces are pushing them exactly where we wanted." "For now," Elira said, unable to shake the unease sitting heavy in her chest. "Ashgrove wouldn't send his forces into an obvious trap without some contingency. He's too careful for that." As if her words had summoned it, a second wave of movement appeared at the tree line, far larger than anything the scouts had reported earlier. Elira's stomach dropped as she recognized the formation, one she had seen briefly on Ashgrove's map before fleeing Blackthorn Hold, a reserve force meant to be deployed only if the initial attack failed. "That's not part of what I saw on the original plans," she said urgently. "That formation, it's a secondary force, held in reserve." Ashgrove must have adjusted his strategy after realizing his first wave was discovered. Ivy's expression tightened. "How large is that force likely to be?" "Large enough to overwhelm the warriors currently engaged if they are caught by surprise," Elira said, already moving toward the runners waiting near the command post. "We need to warn Ronan immediately, before the second wave reaches the fighting." A young runner named Peter, barely more than a boy, stood ready to carry messages toward the front lines. Elira quickly explained what she had seen, urging him to relay the warning about the reserve force as fast as possible. He nodded sharply and disappeared into the darkness, weaving between defensive positions toward the distant battle. The weight that followed felt unbearable, every passing minute stretching endlessly as Elira strained to make sense of the distant shouts and clashing sounds carried faintly on the night air. Ivy paced nearby, occasionally exchanging updates with other scouts, though nothing concrete emerged for what felt like hours. Finally, another runner arrived, breathless and injured, blood staining one sleeve of her uniform. "The king received the warning in time," she reported. "He repositioned the western flank before the reserve force arrived. They are caught between our warriors on both sides now." Relief flooded through Elira, though it remained tempered by the knowledge that the battle was far from over. She spent the following hours pacing near the command post, watching for any sign of the fighting's outcome, until finally, as the first hints of dawn began coloring the horizon, the sounds of battle slowly quieted, replaced by an eerie, exhausted silence. Warriors began returning through the gates as morning light spread across the stronghold, weary but alive, carrying news of victory that spread quickly through the exhausted crowd gathering to welcome them home. Elira searched every face anxiously, her heart pounding as she scanned the returning warriors for any sign of Ronan. She found him near the gates, moving slower than usual, a shallow cut visible along one arm, but alive, unmistakably alive, and the relief that crashed through her nearly buckled her knees. She rushed forward, ignoring the eyes of the gathering crowd, and Ronan met her halfway, pulling her into an embrace that spoke more clearly than any words could have managed. "You kept your promise," Elira said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I told you I would," Ronan said, his arms tightening around her despite his obvious exhaustion. "Ashgrove's forces are scattered, his reserve force destroyed thanks to your warning. This war is over, at least for now." Word of the reserve force warning spread quickly through the returning warriors, and by the time the sun fully rose over the stronghold, even the most skeptical among them had begun to see Elira differently, no longer simply a stranger from enemy territory, but someone whose knowledge and courage had directly saved countless lives during the fighting. Ivy approached later that morning, finding Elira resting near the healer's quarters while Eloan tended to a minor injury on her hand. "I owe you an apology," Ivy said, her earlier hostility replaced by something closer to genuine respect. "Your warning about the reserve force saved dozens of warriors who would have otherwise been caught completely unprepared. I misjudged you. You were protecting your people," Elira said. "I understand that better than most." Ivy nodded slowly, something like approval settling into her expression before she turned and left, leaving Elira alone with her thoughts as Eloan finished bandaging her hand. Later that evening, Ronan found her once more, this time in the tower room where they had spent that first quiet night working together over maps and strategy. He looked healthier now, the exhaustion of battle replaced by something calmer, more settled, as he crossed the room to stand beside her at the window overlooking the stronghold below. "The council has agreed," he said quietly, "that your actions during the battle have more than proven your loyalty. Ivy herself made the strongest case in your favor, which I imagine surprised everyone as much as it surprised me." "I'm glad," Elira said, relief settling deep into her chest at the thought of finally being accepted by the people she had risked everything to protect. "There's something else," Ronan continued, turning to face her fully, his grey eyes holding an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've spoken with my council about formally recognizing the bond between us. I know this isn't simple, given everything you've been through, and I won't pressure you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know that my intention is to claim you as my fated mate, publicly, before my entire kingdom, if you'll have me." Elira felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had happened since she first fled Blackthorn Hold with secrets carved into her ribs. "I came here expecting to either die trying to stop a war, or spend the rest of my life as a prisoner in enemy territory," she said softly. "I never imagined finding something like this." "Is that a yes?" Ronan asked, a faint smile touching his lips despite the vulnerability clear in his voice. "That's a yes," Elira said, closing the distance between them until his arms wrapped around her once more, steady and warm, a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty that had defined every moment since her escape. 3 days later, the stronghold gathered in the same long hall where Elira had first stood bound and soaked before the entire court, though this time, she stood beside Ronan as he addressed his people, declaring her formally as his fated mate before warriors, advisors, and citizens who had once viewed her with nothing but suspicion. "This woman," Ronan announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, crossed enemy territory alone, carried secrets that saved countless lives, and stood beside us through a battle that could have destroyed everything we've built. She is not an outsider. She is not a former enemy. She is Elira, my fated mate, and she will stand beside me as we rebuild what Ashgrove's ambitions nearly destroyed." The hall erupted into applause, warriors and citizens alike welcoming her with genuine warmth that felt worlds away from the suspicion she had faced only days earlier. Elira scanned the crowd, finding Ivy near the front, offering a respectful nod that meant more to her than any formal declaration could have managed. Later that evening, standing together on the balcony overlooking the stronghold bathed in the soft glow of torchlight, Ronan turned to Elira with quiet certainty in his grey eyes. "Ashgrove will not stop entirely," he said. "There will be more challenges ahead, more threats to face together. But whatever comes, we'll face it as partners, not as strangers thrown together by circumstance." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Elira said, leaning into his embrace as the stronghold settled into peaceful quiet below them, the tunnels that had once threatened destruction now sealed permanently, the ink on her ribs no longer a burden of secrecy, but a symbol of the courage that had brought her to this moment, standing beside the king who had chosen her, not despite where she came from, but because of everything she had proven herself to be. The war that had once threatened to destroy 3 parks in a single night had instead become the story of how a scribe from enemy territory became the queen of the very kingdom she had once been sent to spy against, her courage written not just in reverse script along her ribs, but in the lives she had saved and the future she now shared with a king who had recognized her worth from the very first moment their eyes had met.